Well, thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity at least once a year to address this group. And I'm always excited to see some other faces that I'm not familiar with. I know there's some people that pretty much on the same page, but I also want to commend those that came here knowing that they would disagree, okay? With all of the anti-intelligent design creation rhetoric that you hear in formal venues as well as informal, new atheist blogs ranting. There's a lot of pretty strong rhetoric that makes this kind of view pretty unpopular, at least in the intellectual parts of the academy. And it's very easy to just go along with the flow, the rhetoric, and go, yeah, they're just a bunch of wingnuts. They have nothing intelligent to say. I'm not going to go waste my time and listen to them. So even if you disagree vehemently or mildly, thanks for coming, because it's always good to hear the opposition, hear it straight from their mouth and not what other people say they say. And that pretty much is the inspiration for the title of my talk. Over the last 30 years, I've, at the University of Idaho, it says BS in education. It was a BS education / biology. So I was training to be a biology teacher. Since that time, all through college, undergrad, grad school, I got that feeling that a lot of people just didn't want to hear the other side. And I heard a lot of misrepresentations of what Darwin dissenters actually believe. But they never were around, or rarely were willing to engage with someone who disagreed with them. And then they just would perpetuate a lot of this misinformation. So I wanted to go through systematically. There's a lot of, I think, misunderstandings, but I wanted to hit the ones that I thought were the main ones and try to clear up some of those misunderstandings. I say Darwin dissenters because that would include a wide range of belief systems. You've got creationists, you've got intelligent design people, and for one reason or another, they disagree with the general premises of Darwinism. So I just say Darwin dissenters. One of the first claims that I hear a lot, this is not from all evolutionists, but a subset of them, more of the strident, militant kind that you see in Professor Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and a few, Jerry Coyne, and that fellow that Pharyngula. Who's the guy on Pharyngula? Thank you. P.Z. Myers. You get this kind of rhetoric. This is actually more of straight from a quote from Dawkins. It's actually on the back of Why Evolution is True. I once wrote that anyone who didn't believe in evolution must be stupid, insane, or ignorant, and I was then careful to add that ignorance is no crime. I should now update my statement. Anyone who doesn't believe in evolution is stupid, insane, or hasn't read Jerry Coyne. And then it goes on. Well, even though that's more of the kind of rhetoric that you hear from the strident new atheists, I just want to dispel that right off the bat. It should be obvious that there are creationists that are stupid. I know some. But that goes for evolutionists as well. But as far as informed, there's a lot. There's many highly educated people in biology, chemistry, geology, physics, and all the subdisciplines that disagree with the major tenets of Darwinism. There's a scientific dissent from Darwinism list. Now, you can disagree with them all you want, but you're hard-pressed to call them stupid. Okay, they've got advanced degrees. Now, I am certainly not going to toot my own horn. I would say I'm a run-of-the-mill PhD holder. You can even say I'm probably in the lower quartile. I'm not stupid. I graduated from the University of Idaho, and you can't call me stupid unless you're going to insult yourself. But there's many people on this list. This list is pretty long, and it's right now almost 20 pages, or it's 19 going on 20, single-spaced, all PhDs. Many of them holding professorships at major institutions, and in various subdisciplines of these major disciplines that dissent from that. Let me just pull that up for a second. Right here. Scientific dissent from Darwinism. We are skeptical of claims for the ability of random mutation and natural selection to account for the complexity of life. Careful examination of the evidence for Darwinian theory should be encouraged. And the list is quite long. Just a couple people that I want to point out from, just to emphasize that these people aren't stupid, and nor are they ignorant. The guy on the top of the list, first listed, was Phil Skell. He just died recently. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. If you don't know what that is, that's the Jedi Masters of Science. Okay. Another fellow is Dr. Henry Schaefer, who is the director of the Center for Computational and Quantum Chemistry, University of Georgia. He's been nominated for the Nobel Prize in Chemistry 5 times. Now, we can speculate on why he didn't receive the Nobel Prize all you want, but he's definitely not stupid. He's very, very intelligent. Another fellow by the name of Raymond Damadian. We all have heard of the MRI. He invented it. And he's not only a Darwin dissenter, but he's even of the radical kind. Invented the MRI. Another fellow by the name of John Sanford is at University of Cornell. He's a plant geneticist. He's got 30 patents on genetically modified crops. He's invented, or one of the inventors of the gene gun. These guys are not ignorant. You say, well, okay, they're not stupid, they're ignorant, they don't know biology. No, they know biology. They know the mechanism of evolution very well. Okay? And I don't think they're insane either. I know I'm not. You can ask my wife. My kids seem pretty normal, if it's inherited insanity. Whoops, let's just go to the slideshow. Okay. Uh-oh. Help. I won't switch off of that anymore. If not, I think we can read it. Are you fine? No?
No, it's going to happen.
No? I'm not going to waste any more. Let's leave it.
Okay. Do you need this?
Are you going to keep messing with it?
Okay.
Turn that thing off. Yeah, there we go.
Sorry.
Okay. One claim is that Darwin dissenters believe in fixity of species, and let's just settle this. No, they don't. Okay, no informed ID proponent or creationist believes that. Okay, no one believes that. But it's very easy to marginalize them and make them look silly by saying that they do. But that's just perpetuating misinformation. Now, as a group, Darwin dissenters are all over the map as far as beliefs. Many believe in created kinds. Okay, not species, but created kinds with built-in capacity to adapt, built-in genetic capacity to adapt. Others in the Darwin dissent camp believe in common descent. Now you think, well, isn't that evolution? Well, yes and no. They don't believe in mechanistic or naturalistic evolution in the sense that they don't believe that natural processes can account for the complexity that we see around us in all of biological life. So, and again, there's a range of beliefs whether the first cell was created with all of the information front-loaded. I think that's kind of, I don't agree with that. I'm in the first camp with created kinds. Or that some believe in common descent, everything from one ancestor, and then genetic information was put in by the installment plan or something. I'm not sure. But whatever camp they're in, all maintain that the complexity of life didn't arise through random mutation and natural selection alone. Now, in order to discuss this with some sort of fine detail, you have to talk about macro versus micro, because you can really muddy the water if you don't. You can also muddy the water talking about those two terms. Conventionally, macro evolution is large-scale change, for example, from fish to amphibian, amphibian to reptile, and then reptile to birds and mammals, where you see that you're going through major taxonomic shifts. Body plans are changing, even from invertebrate to vertebrate. Somewhere that transition had to occur. So that would be macro. Now, macro also includes speciation in most definitions. And this is where it gets a little nuanced. Microevolution is generally defined as all the variation within a species. So anything species level or under is micro. I don't like that dividing line because most informed creationists and most ID people outside the creationist set would believe that speciation occurs. Speciation, that scares some people, especially creationists, because they think, okay, one species becomes two. But look at the type of change. Is there any increase in complexity? Or is it just modification of the existing gene pool, and we're fragmenting that, and certain groups are being honed by natural selection, adapting to a certain set of environmental conditions, taking on a certain type of a certain phenotype, and they're adapted to that set of conditions versus another. And after a while, they may not be able to breed, or they just normally wouldn't breed. And so in a field guide or in even more formal texts, they would be considered separate species. But there is no increase in complexity, no increase in information, and often in unnatural situations, those species in the same genus can hybridize. So I would prefer, just rhetorically, I think it would be clearer if microevolution would include all empirical evolution that we can see today, or can infer fairly accurately that this kind of change is very possible, even in empirical time frames. So I realize that speciation is considered part of macro, but if I had my way, I would like to put speciation in with micro. The reason it gets confusing is if you are going with the definitions that are conventionally accepted, a creationist would have to say, I don't believe in most macro, but I believe in a little bit of macro, the part that says speciation, or the part that affirms speciation. So speciation from a creationist viewpoint can occur within a kind. A kind is a general term. But biological change has limits, and I think that's testable. You know, that is very testable. I belong to, in the introduction, I belong to a group called the Creation Biology Society, and one of the areas of study is trying to ascertain the created kinds through genetics, hybridization studies, paleontology, biogeography, etc. So it's a multidisciplinary group trying to hone in on where the discontinuities lie between these created kinds, and that's open to scientific investigation. You can have testable hypotheses. So much for the claim that creationists can't have testable hypotheses. You really can test it. You have to have a narrow, just like in all science, you have to have a narrow hypothesis that addresses one question, and then you subject it to the scientific method. It is falsifiable, okay, to figure out these types of things. All right. Some examples of genetic variation we're familiar with. We see that in the dog family. These are mostly Canis lupus familiaris. They've messed with the taxonomy, but it's amazing what artificial selection can do. From Afghan hounds to English bulldogs to this Great Dane. It's looking down at this little fuzzy McNugget dog right here. That dog right there is probably the size of the Great Dane's brain. And that's not necessarily very big. Wolf, chow. Amazing amount of genetic variation within that group, artificially generated. We have the Darwin's finches. Every creationist I know believes that these descended from a common ancestor, so we definitely embrace speciation. This natural selection, this is artificial selection. All these pigeons produced by pigeon fanciers, just producing all these whacked out breeds. I have no idea what the names of these different breeds are, but amazing variation within the rock pigeon, which was the ancestral wild type. And then another example of natural selection at work in the family Camelidae. Now, I don't want to expose my ignorance. I think this is an alpaca, llamas. I think that's vicuña. Correct me if I'm wrong. If that's the guanaco and that's the vicuña, anybody know? And then the Bactrian camel and the dromedary. All of these are in the family Camelidae, and there's very good reason to think that these are all in the same created kind. Definitely different species, but you can actually hybridize there's several hybrids even between the old world camels here with the humps and the llama and they've crossed a llama with a Bactrian camel. It's a comma, and it's fertile. Pretty impressive for supposedly being separated by 40 million years. This is another graphical representation of how to look at different paradigms here. This is called the Linnaean law, and we know that the father of classical taxonomy, Carolus Linnaeus, back in the 18th century, came up with the skeleton of a modern classification system. He came up with kingdom, class, order, family, and genus. Now we've added more genus and species, KCOGs, that's how I remember it. Those were his taxa that he came up with, and then we've added phylum and family since then, and then all sorts of other subdivisions. So he came up with, and it was pre-Darwinian. He believed in fixity of species. So each stick here represents a separate species, and the closer they are, this is creation, so the creator created all these species distinct and separate from each other, even if they're very close, like if it's two species of giraffe. Linnaeus would have thought they were created separately, and then stayed in their separate species all the way. So there was no branching. Then Darwin came along with his theory of natural selection, origin of species, and basically put an evolutionary lens and looked at Linnaeus's classification system. Says, okay, now I'm going to make sense out of it from common ancestry. The reason these two species look so similar, not because God created them similar, but because they came from a common ancestor. Okay? And then you go farther back in the tree, say this is two species or three species in one genus, and so on. And then you go back, so this is a genus, maybe this is a genus, that's a genus, and then we come back to a family, and so on. So it was insightful, but he basically imposed an evolutionary tree on made evolutionary assumptions and superimposed those on the already existing classification. It's been adjusted since then as more data has trickled in. But then in the 20th century, I'm sure there were some earlier, but mostly in the 20th century, the creationists came and said, well, wait a minute, Linnaeus was wrong, and we think Darwin was wrong, but Darwin wasn't completely wrong. There is the capacity of creatures to adapt to their environment, maybe split, get geographically isolated, adapt to different conditions, and become, for all intents and purposes, reproductively isolated. And so we've got what we would call the creationist orchard. And as I said before, these are open to fine-tune and subject to more and more study, but we don't believe in unlimited change. Whether it's at the genus level or family level, it depends on what we have to do a lot more research. But this is kind of a paradigm and under which we can have testable hypotheses and do productive research. So, in short, I would like to say, if given my druthers, macroevolution's idea of common descent. Actually, some of the twigging up here could be included in micro, but in terms of having boletes, polychaetes, sugar beets, and spirochetes having a common ancestor that would be macroevolution, where you have fundamentally different organisms and you can, on the tree, trace them back ultimately to a common ancestor. Whereas microevolution, as I showed with the camels and the dogs and the finches, also the honey creepers in Hawaii, a good example of, again, we haven't seen it happen, but I think we can safely presume that these are all similar enough in terms of their genetics, their basic software and hardware, that they could have descended from a common ancestor. To just empirically look at the type of change that we see empirically, I would recommend, it's a long paper, but it's a good review, and you have to be kind of a biologist to slog through it and get stuff out of it. But I'd recommend it. It's called Experimental Evolution, Loss of Function Mutations, and the First Rule of Adaptive Evolution. It was published in the Quarterly Review of Biology. There's the link if you want it. It's online, you can read it. And, but I'll summarize it by saying that it's interesting. Michael Behe, who is known for his book, Darwin's Black Box, so he was kind of blacklisted by, to get a paper published in a peer-reviewed journal, he had to choose his words carefully. He had to do very good research because when you're already kind of blacklisted as suspect, you know, your intelligent design, we don't want to ruin our reputation as a journal. To publish something from this guy, he definitely had to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that he didn't say anything too crazy. Yeah?
All right. First off, one of your sources was from the Discovery Institute, which is out of Seattle. And they are compiling a list of a group of biologists who say evolution is bullshit, or along those lines. They've got about 750 or so lists of names right now, which may seem really good, but that represents only 0.23% of all evolution.
Do you have a question?
Well, so from that perspective, like, if only 0.23% of biologists are against evolution, then you have
Right.
the stuff like Michael Behe, who everybody says is like that perspective where you don't want to, like, it's that counter argument, but his irreducible complexity.
Yeah, irreducible complexity.
Which has already been.
No, it hasn't. But actually, let me continue on. One thing that's good about science is that it's not democratic. In every case, Darwin was the minority. Okay, so we can't just say that the minority is wrong, because the vast majority of the scientific establishment believes this. And so we can say, we can marginalize this group because they think differently. The people that have supposedly refuted some of these things, you have to look more deeply. You can't just have someone that's just hearsay saying, oh, that's just a bunch of bunk. There's a great proverb that's worth learning, and that proverb is, one man's case seems right until another one comes along to question him. Until you hear Michael Behe come back with a counterpoint, which he is very bright. I know him, and he's a bright man. He knows his biochemistry. So to just marginalize and disregard his stuff, you have to deal with it and grapple with it, and not just hear that someone says, oh, that's been disproved, that's been repudiated. So anyway, feel free to ask your...
that's not what science says. Like, Behe's comments are almost like the astrology versus astronomy. And he's like the 0.5% of an argument, and using that as rationalization to say, oh yeah, everybody else is just centering us. It's the same thing as astronomy versus astrology. It's bullshit. It's not a legitimate argument.
Well, you have to first, rather than just call it illegitimate, you have to show me, and we can do that after the talk so I can finish this. We have to talk about what's not legitimate. What is, he's a careful man, and he's a good scientist, and he's not going to say things, especially, well, in this paper, he just stays on thick ice. He does not get on the skinny branches, or he wouldn't have had it published. And his point in this paper is that he did a great review over the last 4 decades of all of the evolutionary, of bacterial and viral research looking at evolution of bacteria and viruses. Wonderful review of what's been done. He classified all the adaptive mutations. Not all the mutations, because if it was a deleterious mutation or it was a neutral mutation, it didn't confer any advantage whatsoever or was harmful, he didn't categorize it. He only categorized the adaptive mutations, as in, i.e., they had conferred some selective advantage to the organism. He categorized them as loss of function, modification of function, or gain of function. And the vast majority of them were classified as loss and modification of function, very rarely a gain of function. And in the ones that were gain of function, there was no increased totally novel protein or enzyme formed. For example, one of them that was classified as gain of function was a sickle cell anemia mutation, which if in the hemoglobin molecule, you've got your alpha and beta chains, and in the beta chain, on the 6th amino acid residue, there's a mutation that converts glutamic acid to valine. And that was a gain of function in the sense that when the malarial parasite got into the blood cell, it would cause the hemoglobin molecules to chain up like Legos, okay, which would cause the sickle cell anemia symptom. That was a gain of function because it now had a binding function. It changed the protein such that it bound when a normal hemoglobin wouldn't bind together and form Lego chains to cause the blood cells to go into their sickle shape. But that conferred an advantage to the holder of that mutation so that they were somewhat resistant to malaria. Okay, that was gain of function, but it still was hemoglobin, and it was still not a completely new protein. And so when you look at the details, you can parade all sorts of beneficial mutations. You can parade them and say, see, these creationists are whack jobs. They don't know what they're talking about because, see, this is a beneficial mutation. Well, the creationists that are informed know these mutations. In fact, they take a closer look at them and see that the mutations are not totally novel. They're loss, modification, gain of function, but even in the gain of function, it's not totally new genetic information. It's taking something that's already there, and there's a mutation, and it modifies it. It may even cause a new binding site, but it's still in the same class of enzymes. And so it was just a very illuminating paper because it just shows you that empirically there's not a whole lot of empirical evidence that shows that mutation can generate the kind of change, and granted, they'll say, we don't have enough time. I understand that. That's kind of problem. We don't have the kind of experimental time that can prove once for all that evolution, macroevolution can occur. If I had all the money in the world, I would just give a big grant and say, okay, you know, have several 100 million years and try to get dogs into something else. You'll have to make sure that you have all of the scientists stay in fairly uniform conditions, because we don't want the scientists evolving along with them. But it'd be great to fund something like that, but we don't have that kind of experimental time. But we can look at the here and now. We can look at what kind of things mutation actually does, and it doesn't do a whole lot. Not the kind of things that macroevolutionary change requires. But I don't want to shut you down. There is a Q&A time, okay?
Well,
So
like, I don't mean to, like, but the difference between micro and macro evolution is just that time frame.
okay, that's where we would differ, because I don't believe that a lot of evolutionists would say that macro is just a lot, an accumulated micro. But I think there's a very fundamental difference, and that's why I want to include speciation in with micro, because it doesn't matter how much time you give it. Now you say, well, you can't prove it. No, I don't have the experimental time. Nobody does. But we can look at the kinds of changes we see, and those types of changes that we see are not the kind of changes that can take an amphibian to a reptile to a bird. You can infer that there was evolution by looking at fossil record, but that's an assumption saying that it all came from a common ancestor. You can look at similarities and you can look at putative homologies, but that doesn't prove that this could evolve into that through naturalistic processes, and that's what we need to look at.
At that point, you're regarding that little, like, the shit that we don't see in our lifetime as, like, you're restricting what can happen for our lifetimes. You're restricting evolution to that, and it doesn't work that way. Like, there's no evolution between species, or there's no, like, evolution between individuals, I mean. And so, like, there's a type of bacteria that in the last 10 years has been known to change, evolve, because they were in an experiment and they were set up with a limited food resource.
Yeah, like the E. coli in Lenski's lab.
Yeah,
Are you talking about that?
I think the species ended up becoming like Nylonese or something like
No,
that.
the nylonase is the enzyme. They
evolved. Like
well, the thing is, no, but that's what I'm asking you to look at. I'm asking you to look at the type of change. The type of change is modification of existing genes that produce a modification of something that's usually in the same class. For example, Lenski's lab at Michigan State, he's been doing fermentation of E. coli for, I don't know, 25 years.
Yeah.
Okay, and they've got a strain that can now make citrate permease. Okay, is that evolution? Well, yeah, it's microevolution. Is it a new thing? Well, yes, because the E. coli before it wasn't making citrate permease, but if you look a little bit closer, you find out that E. coli can make citrate permease under anaerobic conditions. It's got the gene for it. It normally doesn't make it in aerobic conditions.
But
somehow
is that
there's...
evolution?
Yes, I have no trouble.
Like, that into macro, though.
What?
Like-
But the thing is, it's taking an existing gene that's already there, and it's mutated. Maybe it's in the regulatory region, and now it's turned on. And it was maybe only turned on in anaerobic conditions. Now it's turned on in aerobic conditions. Is this a novel trait? No, this isn't a novel trait. This is something that's already there. And I'm not saying we can call it micro, you can call it, But the point is, it's not evolving something totally new from scratch. Now, the way I would define macro is and this is how I would define it, because it's not blurry, it's not nebulous. It tacks things down. It's the evolution of new traits, physiologies, anatomies, where the ancestor did not have those traits, or those anatomies, or those physiologies, or the genetic information to code for them. If they evolved, and you show me you've got the whole genome sequenced, and you show me that it evolved something through random mutation that the ancestor did not have at all, did not have the genetic information, it was nowhere hiding in the genome. We know that citrate permease has got a gene somewhere in the genome, and it just popped up. It was latent, and it popped up. So that's what we have to look closer. We can't just say, oh, these creationists just don't understand anything. We have to look at the nature of the change. You can, with the Grant's research on the Galapagos Islands, and I applaud them. They've done great field biology for the last a long time, several decades, 30, maybe going on 40 years, measuring beak size and all sorts of other morphometric measurements of finch beaks, and you can look at how natural selection makes the beak depth bigger, smaller. Natural selection drives those types of things. Natural selection is not a dirty word. Creationists embrace it. But it's not it's evolving in the sense, yes, you've changed beak shape, beak depth. And now that the thicker, when you have a dry year, the soft seeds are become very scarce, and the only remaining seeds are very hard nuts to crack, and the thicker beaked finches can crack them. And they survive, the smaller beaked finches. It's a matter of life and death. The smaller beaked finches die on drought years, and then the next generation you've got thicker beaked finches, and you've got an actual evolution of beak depth that goes up on a dry year, it goes back down on a wet, and it goes back up on a dry, so you've got some good oscillating natural selection. But this is a different type of change from beak depth versus evolving a beak from something that never had a beak. Now that would cause me to sit up, okay? Now, if it evolved a beak from no beak and the ancestor didn't have a beak and it didn't have any genes to code for the beak, then I'd sit up and I'd go, you have a point.
First off, the question is this presentation is just in Darwin, which what you just said is the exact claims of Darwin with the beak and all that.
What I'm saying is that a lot of people that object to Darwin dissenters perpetuate the misinformation that we think this is a bunch of baloney. And I am saying that we have no trouble with natural selection, mutation, and things like that, and we believe that it causes change. So they want to make us look. Yeah, the common dissent's the problem, but common dissent and what kind of change occurs from this organism to that. I don't have a problem with speciation, but we have to look at the genes, look at what's there, what's being changed. We have to look a little more deeply. So the claim here is we don't understand the evolution or the mechanisms that drive it, and our understanding of the mechanisms is precisely why we think it can't drive macro. We understand it, and we're saying, I don't buy it. Okay, let's see, when did I start? When was my start time? Kind of about quarter till? Okay, so let me, another claim is ID proponents are creationists trying to fly under the radar, that they're or one said ID proponents are creationists in cheap tuxedos. They're trying to be accepted. They're trying to repackage it, make it more palatable. And that's just not true. Now, a little lesson on Venn diagrams. Intelligent design is the big set. It's, shall we say, common denominator. It only maintains that we can detect design in nature, real design, not apparent design, using only our senses, our logic, our reason, with no reference at all to any sort of revelation from God, no Bible. So they basically say, whether we believe in the Bible or not, we're going to set it off to the side and say, just from data, just from real sense data, we can detect design. That's all ID maintains. Okay, so of course all creationists are within that set. They are a subset because all creationists believe in God, they think God's intelligent, and they think God designed. That's the only commitment on ID. God designed, God is intelligent, therefore I believe in intelligent design. But not all intelligent design people believe in creation. That's there are a lot more specific claims in creation. So you cannot conflate the two. Like I said before, ID people believe in believe in common descent. I know Michael Behe, I think last time I talked to him, he believed in common descent. So in one sense, he's an evolutionist, but in another sense, he's non-Darwinian about it. So you cannot conflate the two, and I think the reason they want to is they think we've already blacklisted the creationists. The scientific establishment has ridiculed and mocked and scorned creationists so much they've really been tarred and feathered, so to speak. And if we can get the ID people, make people think that ID people are creationists, they're guilty by association. And whether they know that or not, I don't know if it's deliberate, but they're trying to conflate and just make ID people the same and trying to ruin their reputation by that way. Now, I'm a creationist. See my tar, see my feathers. But they're not the same. They are not the same. There can be an overlap, as I said on the Venn diagrams. Okay, I'm running out of time. So whatever I don't cover, I can cover next time. But I'll get through this slide and maybe explain it a little bit later. This claim is the theory of evolution is a fact. There's a lot of rhetoric like this going on, and to a certain extent you can say, yeah, if you're talking about microevolution, it's definitely a fact. We can see it, we can show it in the lab, we can demonstrate it empirically. But we have to make a distinction between make a distinction between historical science and empirical science. Empirical science is something you can test, you can have a hypothesis, and you can subject the scientific method to it. It's falsifiable. You can use your senses. You can test it, repeat it, observe it, experiment. Historical science is where you use models. And models are a conceptual framework that you formulate to explain, correlate, and explain and correlate the data that you have. It's like a puzzle box. You've got pieces. The pieces are the data, and the puzzle box is your model. And you look at the model, but in this case, you actually create your model, and then you put the pieces together, and then you adjust your model, put the pieces together, adjust your model. So historical science involves presuppositions and if your presupposition or premise is correct and you reason clearly from that, your conclusion is correct. So in many evolutionists, that's why I do not do what they do to us. I don't say they're stupid. I think they are very smart, and I think they can reason in a straight line. Given their premise or given their presupposition, their conclusion is good. So I don't always have issues with how they reason or how they make their conclusions. I go back to the source. The source is their premise wrong? You can be as the smartest guy in the world, but if your premise is wrong and you think in a straight line, your conclusion is going to be wrong. And so that's why it's so important to look at the premises. It's so important to look at the presuppositions. And the two presuppositions upon which the whole modern Darwinian, neo-Darwinism, the modern evolutionary synthesis is founded on, is these two big presuppositions: naturalism and uniformitarianism. Naturalism states that only natural processes can be considered causal to all natural phenomena. And that I would like to address tonight, maybe in the QA. Next week, I'm going to address uniformitarianism, and I'm just going to look at the major problems of these two presuppositions. So let's see. I can be done in QA. Go, no, okay, well, goody. I wanted to just address naturalism as this is kind of a given in modern science today. It wasn't always that way. If you look at the history of science and all the pioneers of science, this thoroughgoing naturalism that rules God out a priori is just kind of foreign to the foundations of modern science. It's in the last 100 years that naturalism has gained preeminence, and it has really changed the whole profile of the scientific establishment. Only natural processes can be considered causal. Well, we'll go into detail next week, but here's just on the surface a big problem with naturalism. A law of cause-effect. If you consider first causes of matter, energy, and time, I'm not an astronomer or a physicist, but when you just think about it, naturalism says only natural processes or natural law only those can be invoked to explain some phenomenon. Only natural things can be used to explain some phenomena. Well, one phenomenon that needs to be explained is the universe. The big show. All matter, all energy. Now, this is where just right off the bat, naturalism fails. Because you can't have nature create itself. Now, let me explain that. If naturalism says you can only invoke natural processes or laws to explain natural phenomena, and we have to explain the universe, you're basically saying that the processes that are only understandable in the context of the universe, what is natural law? Well, natural law is how matter behaves. The laws governing matter, the laws that are in the system. These laws, these processes don't exist apart from the universe. They depend on the universe. You can't describe them. It's like saying, how does air act in a vacuum? Okay? How does air act in a vacuum? Well, if there's air in the vacuum, it's not a vacuum, gang. Okay? How can you explain nature using only nature? Okay, let me use another example. let's say the universe was an egg. Okay? Let's say the universe was a chicken egg. And you have to explain how this egg came into existence, but you can only invoke processes that are at work within the egg. Think about that. You can only invoke processes at work and only understandable within the context of the egg to explain the formation of the egg. Naturalism falls apart right at the beginning. You need a sufficient cause for the effect, and the effect is the universe, all of nature, all matter, all time, all energy. It can only be explained by something that's, you can't use the physical to explain the coming into existence of the physical. You can't use the physical because the physical doesn't exist yet. You can't use something that doesn't exist to explain the coming into existence of the physical. Okay? So, you need something metaphysical. You need to sit in a closet for a while and think about these things. It has to be metaphysical to explain the coming into existence of the physical. Now, and then the first cause of first life and subsequent life, we thought that good old Pasteur settled that over 100 years ago, but they're trying to resurrect spontaneous generation again. Of course, it's all different scenarios, but we have to ask ourselves, can natural processes account for simple biological life from non-living materials? And we'll just say stay tuned next week where we look at what can primordial soup experiments, origin of life experiments do theoretically and empirically. You'll find that is a faceplant. And probably more than anything else, one of the most powerful arguments for why you need something beyond the physical to explain life. So with that, I'll end it, and then we'll continue on that same thought. Next week, I'll not only discuss that and finish up this idea, but also go into the major bankruptcy of uniformitarianism, and also we will discuss demarcation criteria. The demarcation criteria are what philosophers of science use to distinguish science from pseudoscience. And we will look at that and see how both creation or ID and evolutionary biology, how they fare when subjected to those criteria. And it's quite revealing, very revealing. And then we'll look at methodological naturalism as one of the bouncer that has ejected creation and ID. So, thank you for your time, and I guess we can open it up to questions. I'm kind of tethered here, so I like to walk around, but yeah, Danny.
You described two different kind of sciences, empirical
And historical.
But it seems like they need to have some kind of overlap, or do they? Is there?
Well, yeah. I mean, when you're empirical science is what you usually think of in the scientific method. You observe a phenomenon, you ask a question, you develop a hypothesis, you design an experiment to test the hypothesis. You've seen it in your textbooks. That's the scientific method, and that is what you would refer to as empirical science, whereas historical science is this building a conceptual framework that helps. It's kind of like a whodunit. You weren't there. It happened way back in the unobservable past, and you are collecting circumstantial evidence. You're still looking at data, but you're looking at data in the present, and you are trying to figure out how does this data fit with my model. And if I get a lot of incongruous data, I adjust my model, okay? And that's the thing with you could say, well, evolution as a general blanket is in many ways non-falsifiable, but you can come up with certain clear-cut hypotheses which are very falsifiable, and they are true science. It's the same with creationism. The overarching thing is like, well, God did it. If you're a creationist, then you would say God did it according to the parameters laid out in the Bible, but you can still have testable hypotheses within that framework that are very falsifiable, okay? I see my colleagues in geology, paleontology, doing real science, using the scientific method, and using historical science in exactly the same way as evolutionists would. They do it exactly the same way. One has different implications, though, and they object to those implications. So, yeah.
So I believe I understand your argument correctly, that you believe in pretty much every tenet of evolution other than two completely separate species coming from the same, not necessarily speciation, but like you're saying, invertebrates to vertebrates.
Yeah, major shifts where you have major differences in body plan, major differences. It's like going from a jet engine to an internal combustion engine.
Right.
It's not something you can just kind of.
So I guess my question then is the time period that you're looking at. So we can only have data that we can see, which is the fossil record. We can't, we don't have a time machine, we can't go back and
Right,
say, oh,
right.
this is an intermediate species. So if you have these two fossils that are relatively the same, there are little differences between them. I guess the time frame that you're looking at would kind of dictate what's going on there.
Yeah.
So my question is, for intelligent design, what kind of time frame are they looking at? What is the age of the Earth?
Okay, they don't have an answer because each individual person can have an answer depending on what their narrow paradigm is. But ID as a theory, the only premise, the only thesis they have, and they on purpose, by design, no pun intended, by design, their only thesis is we can detect design in nature. That's it.
Can you define detect design in nature? I guess I'm kind of.
Well, that opens up a whole new talk, but yeah, basically saying, is this apparent design or is this real design? Can natural processes generate this kind of specified complexity and this kind of information? Can it do that? And so mathematicians and statisticians have worked together using formal logic, have come up with a design hypothesis where they say we can show that we can detect design, real design, not apparent design.
Well, I guess if you were to take all the data that we have and look at it in the framework of, say, 6,000 years, I can understand your argument where you could say, okay, there's not enough time to make jumps, but if you go from, let's say, 45 billion years.
Yeah, but this is where I would say that even though I might say that, yes, I believe in a young Earth, but even if I grant you millions and even billions of years, deep time, I believe, doesn't help you, okay? I would say that even if you had all the time in the theoretical world.
But you believe in speciation.
Right, but speciation, like I said, with the finch beaks and all of that, is taking what you've got and modifying it. There's a difference between, this is what mutation does. Let's say you have a term paper, it's a 6-page term paper in a Word document, and in well, let's say it's a dissertation, let's say it's 5 chapters, and you have to, in your major professors, you have to write chapter 6. Because there's all these loose ends, and you need to really tie up those loose ends and write chapter 6. And you're brain dead from 5 years of research and slave labor. And so you say, I'm fed up, I can't think, I can't write another chapter. I'm just going to take chapter 5, I'm going to copy and paste, but I don't want it to be identical. So I'm just going to introduce random typographical errors into chapter 5, rename it chapter 6, and then turn it in to my major professor. I don't think he'll go for it. I don't think that random typographical errors are going to improve it. And you can call your professor selection pressure. You can call him selection pressure.
That's one generation.
Okay,
Yeah.
do a bunch of generations.
But I mean, you can only hand the paper in once. I mean.
Oh no, let's say
I
you
get
get
your
to
point.
hand it in a bunch, and
Okay.
he keeps on doing it.
Okay, yeah.
He keeps correcting it.
Sure.
And so, yeah.
I was just wondering, so from a purely scientific standpoint, do you regard creationism as a theory?
Well, it depends on what and that's what's next week's topic, not next year's. It depends on how you define science and what type of historical science is allowed. So we'll find out next week using the demarcation criteria if you have really stringent standards on historical science, on all of the things itemized. It rules out a lot of the activity of even the evolutionists. So I'll title it, "What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander." If you tighten up those criteria, you eliminate both. Creation, ID, evolution is outside science. If you loosen them up, those criteria so that the evolutionist can still do his detective work and trying to piece together the evidence and come up with models, then both are allowed. Okay? So the demarcation criteria, it has a lot to do with how you can't use a double standard. You can't be loose with the evolutionists and be tight with the creationists. You have to be fair and even-handed. And that's why Judge Jones in the Dover trial didn't use those criteria, because he knew he would have to use a double standard. So they ousted ID based on, we can't use, just on one thing, which was methodological naturalism, which said you cannot invoke any kind of intelligent agent in your explanation. And that's what ousted them. Yeah.
Well, you made the statement that you accept microevolution, but not macroevolution, correct?
Right.
Okay. even
Well,
though it's
depends on how you define them.
Okay, well, even though it's the same mechanism, it's occurring for each one of them. My
Well-
question to you is, have you ever seen micro-intelligent design happen that we can actually observe?
Micro-intelligent design.
Yeah, I mean, we've actually seen the same mechanism that happens with evolution happening in the laboratory. Have we ever seen that happen with intelligent design? Because if you think about it, with intelligent design, you first have to believe in God in order to buy into this.
Well, this is where intelligent design, I happen to think that most intelligent design people believe in God. But the design hypothesis does not demand that. And a lot of times they insist on it. They say, all we're saying is that it invokes design, and we're not saying the nature or the identity of the designer. I think, oh, come on. I think, yeah, God. Because if you say it's a naturalistic intelligent agent like an alien, then you've got infinite regression problems. But the design hypothesis doesn't say that the designer is necessarily supernatural.
I
But
mean,
go ahead.
You can call it whatever you want to call it, but the problem is, I mean, when you look at this, you first have to believe in this higher power that you talk about. You have to
Mhm.
believe in something, whether it's the flying spaghetti monster and time traveling scientist or whatever you want to call it. And the thing of it is, we've never actually observed microevolution. We don't have a physical mechanism, or we've never actually observed intelligent design.
Oh, no, we don't see it stepping in now and saying, okay, a new gene popped in all of a sudden because God is designing things right now. But from just studying life in general, we can see that naturalistic processes do not generate this kind of complexity. We do see processes that monkey with and mess with the information that's already there and modify it. But we do not have a mechanism.
Can you demonstrate intelligent design doing anything? That is my final question.
Look at all of life.
But
look
that's
at-
not a demonstration, that's an inference
Yeah.
based on what you see. Everything.
It's called
Every
good.
point
good-
that has ever been made.
good
on
remark,
intelligent design
Dan.
would simply be based on the idea that we don't know something.
It's
Like
it's
the-
inference
the
to the
words
best
of the
explanation.
Geometry,
Dan?
You're just saying, we don't understand this, and so you're using God as the explanation.
Okay.
God,
Did you have a comment?
I want to comment on that because I think it's a good point. You know, that evolution is a historical science, like Gordon said. Nobody was there to observe it, you can't repeat it. So you have to use, if you look at Darwin's arguments, they fall into three categories. Uniformitarianism was functional today in terms of natural law was functional in the past. Inference to the best explanation, and competing hypotheses. What other mechanism could explain it? And so ID people are doing the same thing. Now, is it a point? Can we detect design in nature? Let me give you an example. The genetic code. Are you familiar with the genetic code?
Yes.
Okay. We all, as biologists, agree that this is a very sophisticated information storage system. In fact, according to Bill Gates, it trumps anything that Microsoft has made. All right, and it's not an arbitrary code. It is maximized to minimize the effect of mutations. All right, it's a true digital readout system. It's converting the information from nucleic acid chemistry to protein chemistry. It's a sophisticated mechanism. It's a frozen accident. It's the same code in archaeobacteria as in your petunias, as in our own cells. All right, now, inference to the best explanation would be on the logic of, is if I find a language, if I find a musical scale, if I find a computer code, what is the explanation for it? By my common experience of cause and effect, standard scientific reasoning, when I find something that has information stored and readout in a digital system, I know from my experience that there's an intelligence behind it. And when I find the mother of all codes that's not evolving, it's a fixed frozen accident, then I don't think that somebody like Gordon or myself are out of line in saying that given this sophisticated mechanism, can we explain it by natural selection and mutation? Or can we say that, yeah, from experience I would have to infer that there's an intelligence behind it because I know that in every language that I'm familiar with, in every mathematical system that I'm familiar with symbols and then readout systems and digital computer systems. If the genetic code for the lac operon says, if glucose is absent and lactose is present, then make beta-galactosidase. It's a simple Fortran statement of logic. Can unintelligent processes of natural law produce these things that we have discovered millennia afterwards?
I'm going to say that your argument.
I'd like
is
to
comparing
interrupt at
apples
this
and
point.
oranges. If I could just finish
Dan.
this one thing. I got to say that your argument's apples and oranges because we've seen people create languages. We know people create languages.
Yeah.
Have we ever seen
They're
this
intelligent.
I would say so. That's the inference to the best explanation. I have no random, in fact, people have done the experiments to generate genetic codes by random processes, taking the nucleic acid code.
But
And you
is
get
it a false
you get
dilemma to
nice-
say because science can't prove something that God did it?
No,
That's
it's
a,
not.
That's a faulty conclusion.
It's not, but it's an
irrational. It
It's an
It's
inference
saying
to
the
the
world
best
is black and
explanation,
white,
given,
there's nothing
given
in
the
between.
information that we have.
Only using your logic, only using the particular logic that intelligent design likes to use, does that hold true?
No,
That's
this
the
is
reason
standard
why-
scientific logic of
That's the
cause
reason
and
why
effect.
intelligent design hasn't made it into science curriculums, is because it hasn't proven itself scientifically, because of these discrepancies that we're bringing up.
No, wait a minute. Standard scientific reasoning of cause and effect says, you admitted it, we have no other explanation for these other than our logic. Am I out of bounds? Do I have to make a leap of faith and say that unintelligent forces of chemistry and physics can produce a code, a language system that's more sophisticated out of nothing? That can produce
have
this-
been in part, they have produced part of the genetic code in a lab from base elements. So, I can't remember which exactly one.
Show
Out of
me
what?
the- Show me the paper.
If I need your email afterwards, I will definitely get, there's two of them. I can't remember if it was Lemony or, it was A or C or T or G. And by hitting it out with a photon at a certain stage in this chemical apparatus that they built, I'll have to find it and I don't
Yep.
know it by heart.
Feel-
But lack of an answer still doesn't bring the conclusion.
We'll talk about,
I mean,
Matt, we'll talk about God of the Gaps next week.
All right, let's give Dr.
I'd just like to say to those that have questions, keep asking those questions, but also, and both, it goes for you creationists too. Be good, both of you, both camps, be good listeners. Be good listeners to each other. Creationists are going out and often perpetuating some of these things I'm trying to destroy, because the creationists are often really misinformed, okay? So you creationists need to understand evolution, and that's why I have my students read Darwin. I have them read Dr. Coyne. You guys need to know what the opposition believes, okay? And you, the evolutionists here, need to start interacting, not just here, but start interacting with some of the best minds and scientists in my camp, okay? And quit listening to just this vitriolic nonsense on these rant blogs, okay? Start interacting with the actual arguments and don't just listen to slander. Thanks.